The ability to include the contents of one file inside another is one of the most powerful features of PHP, thanks to its support for server-side includes. An important advantage of server-side includes is that all the files are merged on the server, so it doesn't result in multiple requests from the browser. External files can contain just PHP code, HTML or plain text, or a mixture of HTML and PHP. This means you can use server-side includes for code libraries containing your own custom functions, or one of the popular PHP frameworks. Server-side includes are also a great time saver when used for common web page elements, such as header, footer, and navigation menu. Because each page uses the same external file, you can update a menu or other common element by editing and uploading a single file. To include an external file, you use one of these four commands: include, include once, require, or require once. Why four? Well, the best way to understand the difference is to see them in action. This is a very simple HTML file and the way that it looks in a browser. In another file, I've got just a snippet of HTML which I want to include in that main file. When using HTML in a server-side include, the file should contain only an HTML fragment because everything in this file is going to be merged into the main file to create a single page. So don't have a doc type or a head or anything like that in there, just the bit that you want to include. So let's include that after this paragraph here. An opening PHP tag followed by include, and then that's followed by the path to the file that you want to include. Because of the way that PHP looks for external files, it's best to use a document relative path beginning with a period and / to indicate that the path begins in the current folder. So quotation mark and then period / and it's in the includes folder, which is a subfolder of the current folder, and it's called paragraph HTML. I've used HTML as the file name extension. In fact, it doesn't matter what file name extension you use, but normally for my external files, I'll use .php. Let's just copy that and add it after the other paragraph. Save and refresh the browser. You can see that that HTML snippet has now been included into the main file twice. And if we go into source view, you can see that there's absolutely no way of telling that they've been merged from two files. It looks as though it is one file, and as far as the browser is concerned, it's just a single request. Now, what if the file can't be found, if I've misspelt the name? Let's just take that H out of there and resave it, and then refresh the browser. We've got some nasty warnings here, but the rest of the page has been rendered as normal. And in fact, on a live website, you wouldn't have these error messages. We can emulate that by turning off display errors. Using a function called ini_set, and then the configuration command display errors. And the way in which you turn it off is with a string containing 0. So if we now refresh the browser, those error messages have gone. So the way in which include works is that it tries to find the file. If the file isn't there, then it just carries on as normal. The HTML from the included file has a link in it, so let's see what happens when I click that link. The page can't be found. Let's look at the HTML to see why that happens. The link in here is a document relative link, and it's relative to the external file. But once that external file is included in the main file, the link needs to be relative to the new file. Because files that are included can be at all sorts of different levels within the site hierarchy, the way to get around this problem is to use a link which is relative to the site root. In other words, it begins with a /. And so introducing PHP, and then this folder is called functions, objects, errors. And if I save that, and if we go back and reload that file, we should now have the link working correctly. Excellent. Now, something which many people find rather confusing. Inside the server-side include, I've used a link that is relative to the site root. But in the include command itself, I've used a document relative link. Why not use links relative to the site root in both cases? Well, the simple and sad answer is that PHP won't understand a link that is relative to the site root for an include command. So you need to use a document relative link. Now let's see what happens when I use include once. We just need to change that name back to the correct file. And if we refresh the browser, we need to go back to that particular page. And the external file has now been included only once, and it's only the first time that it's been included. You might be wondering what the value of that is. Well, very often in PHP you're using conditional statements, so your include might be inside a conditional statement, and you don't know whether that condition will be true or false. But if you want to include something but only once, then using include once is very helpful when working with conditional statements. Let's take a quick look at require. I've used require here to include my function PHP, which contains this function, which is then called down here. If we look at the page in a browser, you can see that it's converted the number to minutes and seconds. But let's see what happens if the file can't be found. Let's change the name of the file and refresh the browser. We get a warning here, but then we get a fatal error, and nothing else is rendered. So require is used in the sense of mandatory. If the file can't be found, then the server just gives up. So let's just do another quick test here. Restore the name and do something which you wouldn't normally do, and that is to repeat the require. So I'm going to require that external file twice. And if we refresh the browser, we immediately get a fatal error, and it says that you cannot redeclare convert seconds. In other words, you can't declare a function twice. Obviously, putting require twice in this position doesn't make a great deal of sense, but if you have require in conditional statements, you've no idea whether it's already been included, so therefore require once is the way to get around this particular problem. So if I do require once in both occasions and resave that and refresh the browser, the page now works correctly. So although there are 4 different commands for including server-side includes, they do actually have different purposes, but I think that you can narrow them down to 2. Use include for files that aren't mission critical, and require once for files that define custom functions. The other things to remember are that you should use a document relative path to include a file, but links inside a server-side include should be relative to the site root.